All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And as part of the Rankin Technical College Application and Website Development, or AWD1111 Database-Driven Web Development course, I'm creating a series of video presentations. The first three sections being review for the class, and those are, went out to the Valley of Code, which is a website by Mr. Flavio Copes, and I've downloaded his HTML handbook, CSS handbook, and JavaScript handbook. So far, I've finished the HTML handbook, and I did 5 different presentations. I've done 4 or 5 so far on the CSS handbook, and I'm about 75 pages into 175 pages. Then I'll do JavaScript. Then we'll maybe create a couple websites, and we'll go into the Node.js handbook and the React.js handbook. This is a review of client-side JavaScript before we go into the server-side JavaScript. All right, and the next thing I'd like to talk about in here is the CSS box model. So if you look at it, that everything you put on a web page, every letter of every word, etc., virtually everything that you put in there on a web page, all right, is inside of a box. All right. And what we're saying here is, what do we have? This is our content. Our content is surrounded by padding. So that's the area around the content. The padding is surrounded then by a border. And the border is surrounded by margin. Now, we've talked a little bit about this stuff before, and I mentioned that the padding is basically the content and basically everything around it, where the margin is more what's between different elements. We haven't really talked about border yet, so we will talk about it. So as it says, the content is the content of the box, either text or images. The padding is the area around the content. It is transparent. So you can set how much of it there is, but you can't set padding color, etc. All right, padding and margin are pretty much set the same way. And if you remember from the, quote, old-fashioned days, so let's put in here, and I'm going to put in here an analog clock, not click, clock. All right, if I look, I'll just grab this one. It's fine. It doesn't, well, baloney. Doesn't matter which one really I grab. How about this one? Can I grab that one? Nice. All right, well, we'll do it like this then. That's totally fine. All right, I'm going to this. Heck with that. All right, I'm going to grab this clock that you see right here. Okay. All right, now, you all know 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. The reason I'm showing you this picture is when we talk about padding and we talk about margin, 12 o'clock is padding top, 3 o'clock is padding right or margin top, margin right, 6 o'clock is padding bottom or margin bottom, and 9 o'clock is padding left or margin left. All right, as far as the way that you set this stuff up. And border, again, by default, things don't have a border around them. You can put a border around most anything. I'm not going to say you can put it around anything. I said most anything. So when we come back into here then, all right, so they're showing it this way. So there's our content. Outside of our content is our padding. Outside of our padding is our margin. Is our border. And outside of our border is our margin. All right. So the border, as it says, is the thin layer between the padding and the margin. When you work with border, you're basically typically set it up as one line and you put these 3 things in. The style of border you want, the color of border you want, and the width of border you want. And again, quite often this is done in pixels. When you set up borders, here are the styles that you can get. In fact, let's look at the pictures. Dotted, dash, solid, double, groove, ridge, insert, outset, none, and hidden. All right, and he's got a code pen in here if you want to see more. All right. You can also, when you put a border around, you can have just a border top, just a border left, just a border right, or just a border bottom. All right. So they're showing some examples in here. The width, again, says you can use the predefined values. I always just give it a size, usually a pixel or a couple pixels. Let's look at the example that they have here. All right. So let's just do it this way. We'll go back to our CSS file. Let's use our H2 because we only have one of those. Let's give it a border. And let's say that it'll be dashed, it'll be red, and it'll be 3 pixels wide. We should be able to see this immediately on our H2. There it is. Dashed H2. All right. And the more that you take this border and the more you make it, so notice if I come back in here, change it from 3 pixels to 30 pixels, watch how much the effect changes. All right. And the dashed is really ugly. Quite often what you'll find in here is when people are creating borders, all right, you don't want necessarily that to stand out, so you'll just make it solid. Now that's pretty thick, all right, but you can make it whatever size you want. If I want it half that size, of course, I can just go in there and cut it down from 30 to 15. Save it, and you can see how it's been cut down. You get the idea. So you can play again with colors. This is really ugly. Here they're setting a border color. So the top, the right, the left, and the bottom are different colors. I don't know why you'd want to do that. Virtually, again, you always do it with this shorthand property, as I'd already mentioned. One thing that's very popular to put on here is a radius as well. All right, so I'm going to add a radius to what I just put in there because I want you to be able to see this. So remember what this looked like right there. But we've got squared edges here. All right. And now we're going to come back and we're going to change that to a border radius. Let's make it 5 pixels. And notice now it's got a little more of a rounded look. All right, I thought it would be more than that. Let's try making it bigger. Maybe I'm doing it wrong, but I don't think I am. Let's make it 15. Now it looks much more rounded. All right, and again, these are things that oftentimes you are going to end up doing just for the effect that they have. You can use images as borders. I don't know if I've ever done that. I've talked padding and I've talked margin with you already, and I mentioned the most important things. Margin is the space between elements. Padding is the space within an element. You can set padding top and or right and or bottom and or left. I showed you the clock analogy. There are also shorthands. If you just say padding with one value or margin for that matter, this is going to give you, this is the same thing right here as saying padding top 20 pixels, padding right 20 pixels, padding bottom 20 pixels, padding left 20 pixels. All right. If you use 2 numbers like this, then the first number, this is like saying padding top 20 pixels, padding bottom 20 pixels, padding left 10 pixels, padding right 10 pixels, padding left 10 pixels. All right. You can also use 3, where that's for the top, that's for the left and the right, and that's for the bottom. Or as already mentioned, you can use all 4. Again, margin works the same way. There's really nothing else to say about this. This should all be review. There should be nothing in there that's new to any of you. All right. The other one that's kind of nice is using that margin auto to center things. All right. So let's see if we can take a paragraph, and I don't know how well this will work, but we'll say margin 0 auto. What that means is we want no margin on the left or the right, and we want the top, we want no margin on the top and bottom, and we want the left and the right to be automatically have an automatic margin, which means that they will be centered. All right. Let's go in here and let's copy this. And I don't know what we can even grab for this. I don't know if this will work or not, but before we set the margin up like this, if it doesn't work, we'll just set it back again. But I'm going to put in here the margin 0 auto, and then I'm going to comment this out. So this is for our lists. See if this does anything. And you'll notice in this case, it did not. There are certain things that work well with, if I'm trying to center a web page itself, I'm going to typically use margin 0 auto. I'm trying to think of what else I use it for, and I don't know if there's a whole heck of a lot, at least that comes to mind. You can use negative margins, and the reason that you might do this is especially if you're doing something where you are working with animation to make something slide in from off the screen. All right, you could give it a negative left margin to have it come in from the left, or a negative top margin to have it come down, etc. All right. Box sizing here, it says the default behavior of browsers when it calculates the width of an element is it applies everything. So if you put in margin and you put in padding, it could kind of screw this up. But what you oftentimes see at the top, and I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to put it at the top in my body up here. Okay. In fact, can I do it like that? Nope. So let's see. I guess I will put it in here. Like that. All that says, or what that says, is that when you are sitting there and figuring out the width of an element, do not include any extra padding or margin that are in there. All right. And I believe it's just, yeah, I think it's only the margin actually that's left out. All right. I think that even though this is early right now, this is a good place to stop. And I will pick it up in the next lecture talking about displays, and we'll talk a little bit more about inline and block elements, etc. All right, so again, we're going to go through this. When we get done with this, we're going to jump into the JavaScript one, and we're going to hit some of that. After we hit the stuff in the JavaScript, all right, I'm going to go through and give some extra examples, and then we'll go in and maybe go in and look at a couple websites before we go into the Node and before we go into the React. All right, so I will be back starting with lesson unit 27 in just a few.